Welcome to the latest episode of The Grower and The Economist. I'm Michelle Klieger, The Economist.
And I'm Peter Conjoyan, the grower.
Each week, we team up to tackle the biggest challenges facing small and medium-sized growers. We're one part grower and one part economist, just like your business.
On this episode of The Grower and the Economist, we have a returning guest with us, Keith Bemerer from Prospiant. Keith, we asked you to come back because we had so much fun in our first episode talking about greenhouses and how they relate to both farm and ornamental operations. And you and I have had conversations since then about energy conservation. So we thought that we would task you with leading us in a conversation about energy conservation in greenhouses, be it a greenhouse single Quonset on a farm or one or more Quonsets in an ornamental greenhouse or a bedding plant operation. So first, welcome back to the gate, and it's nice to see you again.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to be back, and yes, we do have a great topic that seems to be on every grower's interest and value this year is energy conservation and saving money. We can certainly try to put people in the correct direction to make sure that they are doing the right things to save some money this coming year.
Fuel costs, energy costs, electricity, power consumption, all of that is front and center on our minds going into this next heating season, Michelle. Can you help frame the conversation a little bit? We're talking about costs rising, we're talking about inflation, and just give us a little backdrop as Keith and I get started on the details.
Sure. I am assuming that you don't want lots of numbers because I didn't get the question before we started today. So it's just going to be big picture. But if any listeners want more up-to-date information, they can find me on social media. I talk about it a lot, or email me. So in general, energy prices have come down a little bit from their peak last summer, but are still much higher than we saw pre-pandemic. And there's a number of reasons for this. Climate conditions being different, with lower solar out of Europe in the summer, lower hydroelectric across the northern hemisphere because of droughts, war in Russia and Ukraine. All of these reasons are limiting production of electricity, of energy, and reducing the amount of fuel available. This affects agriculture very acutely because fertilizer production is extremely energy intensive. And so when energy prices go up, you drive all of those fertilizer prices up. In field agriculture, you drive diesel up, which is necessary for getting in and out of the field. In greenhouse operations, the cost of running the electricity is significantly higher. So this has been on top of mind for a while now. But moving into the winter, when the Northern Hemisphere demands so much more energy for heating purposes, the concern is significant. And it's not just in the United States, it is a global concern. I believe that, Europe and the UK are looking at built heating costs that are 10 plus times what they were in the past. So it's really affecting everyone, households and, industry and growers alike. And then it also is raising questions, big picture, about what that means for transitioning away from coal and into more renewables. If energy is already expensive, can individuals or businesses or economies afford to really limit the supplies of dirtier energies? So those are all big picture. And then I would just throw in that that's all on your input side, that if you were going to talk about your selling side, consumers are struggling with their budgets right now, and in the last couple of weeks we've seen a decrease in purchases of fresh fruits and vegetables. And so how is this moving forward going to impact the availability of people that have money to buy products? And so I think that the price point that you're going to sell at, we've talked a lot about how there is room to raise prices because input prices are higher, but we are beginning to see that limit of when consumers are saying, look, I need to find something else, or I need to purchase it somewhere else.
All right, great backdrop. Thank you, Michelle. Keith, so we got a big picture, global picture. Let's now drill right down and you take us into a conversation. How is this farmer or greenhouse operator with one or more Quonsets looking forward to this 2022-23 heating season? What are some of the things that you're talking about with your customers?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting conversation, that's been going on, especially in the greenhouse nursery operations. Is many of the growers, what they tend to do a little bit earlier than we are now is try to lock in their fuel values, and so a lot of them have not been getting the pricing that they've had in the past. There's a global concession that it could possibly be in the United States that it could go up to like almost $8 per decatherm, which is expensive. When most growers are used to like 3 to up to $4 per decatherm, and so Michelle hit all the points there that the global economy is really affecting our fuel prices. A lot of people don't know that about 20% of our reserves that are used for natural gas is actually shipped to Europe right now to help them to get the fuel they need because of the Ukraine, Russian war. And a lot of people are like, well, how's that even possible? And the way I've been told is that they can actually compress that gas down from the size of, say, a beach ball to about the size of a golf ball to ship it overseas. But that still takes away the U.S. reserves, and it's causing a lot of the energy costs increase. To that, they're sending that to Europe. Growers are frantically trying to get the lowest rate that they can get right now. And how is that affecting the greenhouses? It's really going to watch what growers are growing. I've talked to several growers that said that they feel like there's certain crops that they can't do they normally would. Like right now, poinsettias are huge, and so you just can't grow a poinsettia at a colder temperature than it's designed to be grown in. And so either they've reduced the amount of poinsettias they're done, or they have completely just eliminated the crop completely to cut the fuel costs so they can shut down greenhouses so they don't have to heat them this winter. But in the long run, you're raising another problem is that, these are a giant colander of heat loss. They they leak the heat on like your home or my home, and so you know if if our weather turns south and we do get a significant snowy season, you know we always tell people in our industry to keep them at a minimum of like 40 degrees so that the snow can melt off and and liquefy so that you don't risk losing your structures, causing you more cost in the long run, especially when steel and aluminum and all still at an all-time high. And so, it's that fine line. Do you continue to go the route that you are and raise your prices to the consumer come spring 23, or do you start cutting back and not offer some of the plants and some of the things that consumers expect you to have at all?
Yep, that's a great point. Michelle, you and I have talked at length about 80-20 rule and how small growers can produce some of the lesser mainstream types of crops, and there's a large assortment there for growers to choose from. So Keith, kind of building on your comment, if a poinsettia is too expensive to produce because of the heat input and energy input, then what other minor crops could growers grow? And you and I go back, decades together, and this same argument came up decades ago in terms of poinsettias, and we said, well, can we create a market for calceolaria, cineraria, some of these other cooler requiring crops? And we may be back there. And even in the edible greenhouse market, Keith, maybe we're going to see some growers shift from, a tomato or a cucumber that requires the heat of a poinsettia to a kale or a cooler season type of leafy green.
Yeah, that's an absolute good point. I'm seeing a lot of growers shifting over from the horticulture floriculture market to more the vegetable. And you can see, one of the things is that if you do want to run your greenhouse at a cooler temperature, one of the best crops that you can grow is leafy greens. lettuce takes a lot cooler temperatures than, like you said, tomato or pepper or cucumbers and stuff like that. So, I'm seeing a lot of greenhouses switch over to different hydroponic techniques because then they don't have much inputs, but they also have a quicker turnaround time so that they can produce a crop faster compared to, say, the poinsettia. The other example is that a lot of growers don't take in consideration is the temperature of their water. And some growers, they might have a city water source or a municipal water source, but some growers pull from ponds, they pull from aquifers, they pull from underground water sources and stuff like that, but that incoming water could be under 50 degrees. I was reading a fascinating article this past week about caladiums, which is a very popular greenhouse grown crop, and they were testing the temperature of the water for how well the crop could grow. And when they're pushing those bulbs, they want a ground temperature, a bed temperature of 80 degrees, which is pretty high, for propagation, which we'll get into a little bit later. But they were testing all the temperatures of the water to see how well the crop turns out. Well, a caladium requires pretty much above 60, 65 degrees. If you're January and you're pulling from a pond, you'd be lucky if that water coming in is 45, 50 degrees after it gets into the greenhouse. And are you going to risk heating the water, or are you going to just let it go on and watch your crops have issues? So
That's a good point, Keith. This seasonal difference in the water. I'm on municipal water, and in my home beer brewing, from season to season, I have to watch that temperature of the water coming out of the tap when I'm blending it with the hot wort, so that I know what my final temperature is. So yeah, during the summertime, I have more cooling to do. In the wintertime, a little bit less.
You said that people are purchasing their fuel or trying to lock in some of those prices now, and that they're considering changing some of the crops. So, how much different is this from other years? When would those purchases normally take place? And if you've had a good year, is it one of those that you want to lock it in before January, and so that you're able to put those expenses on this year?
yeah, so that's actually a good point. This time period almost reminds me of the 08, 09 years, when we were in another recession. And growers were, it would be monthly. I've heard some small business operations would spend almost $9,000 to $12,000 a month just on heating their greenhouses. And I think that they were, now the growers have a perspective that they could go back in their records and they can see exactly what they did back in 08, 09. So they can prep themselves, and they can financially position themselves to know what they need to do, and they can make changes. And I'm hearing a lot of growers do that. They're going back and they're saying, well, here's what I spent in February of 08, 09. That's what I'm going to base this on for my budgeting processes for that. But a lot of growers, Michelle, what they're saying is when they go in, they lock in the prices. Some growers have the option they can actually lock in for 3 years. So if a grower locked in their fuel values, say last year, and for a 3 year period, they're taking the roulette version of fuel prices. They're looking, they could have the choice where they could be, oh, thank God we did this, or they could be going, oh my God, we locked in so high, we're stuck and we're paying more than we thought we would come down the wayside. And I'm hearing more people actually say that they're at the end of their 3 year, and they kind of wish they extended it, back in 2021. And so, but there's other growers out there that they ride the wave, whatever the fuel price is, they're not locked in with a conglomerate to, they just do what their municipality charges them for gas. And so they're gonna be paying the premium, and that's when usually you hear people start to have the issues within the crop, the greenhouse itself. But the larger scale operations, over an acre, they usually are with a conglomerate, and they lock in a certain price, so that it doesn't change with the market, but at least they're paying a smaller price. But that, it can be a make or break point. They just don't. You're taking a gamble when you do it. And if people did do it years ago, it was a smart move.
That was a question I got a lot this summer with fertilizer, and it's just one of those being cognizant of sort of like this too shall pass, right? And so that fear that fertilizer prices were going to go up forever, being cognizant of not locking in something too high. And then we had John from Michigan State on, and he talked about thinking about how much energy you need and what's your bare minimum, and maybe locking that amount in for your 3 years, but giving yourself some flexibility on the rest so that you don't get locked in too high or don't miss out on something. And so being very strategic in what you need.
Yeah, and I mean that's the other thing too. There's we're talking natural gas here, but the other thing is some growers are on propane. Their propane costs. I know regionally around here and here in Ohio, some of the propane providers they allow you to lock in July. So what a lot of growers will do is they might have 1,000 gallon tanks, thousand. They might buy 4,000 gallons at the summer price in July, and then they'll just say they'll call their distribution network and say, "Here, I need to have a fill up. Can you come and do it?" And so that's one way growers can save. If they'll let them do it. Now if you're buying it on the whelm, as we get into the heating season, mostly for residential and stuff like that, it's going to start going up in price. And if we actually have a very cold winter, your 1,000 gallons might be gone in 1 month. To me, it's always good to have a good mix of alternative fuels in a greenhouse setting. So if there is some situation where natural gas line gets severed or something like that, you might have a propane backup, or you could run on fuel oil, and stuff like that. It's those times where I think it's a good thing for growers to start looking into that, just to make sure that they have a backup so they don't lose an entire crop, come January, February, and stuff like that. One of the things that it's important to know is as we get into like temperatures that hit like zero, everybody's home furnaces are pumping 100% all the time. A lot of energy companies, what they'll do to supplement because of the pressure loss is they'll actually add propane to the natural gas line. And in that, what happens is you can tell because your equipment starts to howl. You'll hear a high pitched sound, and people think that their equipment's breaking down. Well, it's because their fuel is running leaner than the equipment is set for, and it's requiring more air. And so that howling sound is that extra boost that's required. News coming out of this week: Buffalo. I mean, they're impacted by 77 inches of snow, and if you're a greenhouse operation up in the New York area, your heaters are running nonstop. So I guarantee that they're going to have issues. And at that point, safety kicks in too, because the exhaust ports on heaters and intakes, for that matter, if it could become potentially dangerous besides the structure. So it's good to have alternative fuels, and it's something I think more growers are going to start looking into in the future regarding electricity and fuel heating oils.
That's a
Thank
really
you.
good point, Keith, about the fuel capability. I'm on propane with my greenhouse because I do not have natural gas on my street. So I don't have a choice there, but my emergency generator, when I lose electricity, I'm enjoying the most recent generator I bought that will run on either gasoline or propane. And so what you're saying about the alternative fuels, yes, if my generator, I've learned that if it's very cold, I have a much easier time getting it started on propane. And then once the generator runs for a while and is warmed up, I can switch over to gasoline, with the flip of a switch. So that's a really good point. Let's now shift into the actual greenhouse and some of the technology that you've helped us with in our first episode in discussion. Uh, as a case study, Keith, let's use the energy curtain that I installed last year with your guidance. And let me start off by just throwing out some really round numbers. If in your earlier comments you were referencing where heating costs or fuel costs could double, now let's talk about an energy curtain in a greenhouse, which numbers you've shared with me. Basically, we can cut our heating cost in half. So, in a scenario such as this for this year, I'm saying, okay, I've got the energy curtain, I'm cutting my fuel bill or my fuel consumption by half. Oh, by the way, the cost of propane is doubled. So I'm just treading water. But think about how much worse it would be if we hadn't installed the energy curtain. So go with some of your comments.
You had a perfect setup for the energy curtain usage. We talked early on. You were heating, and you were saying you were going through your propane relatively quickly, and you were trying to conserve that cost. And we came up with the idea of adding an energy curtain. And for those that don't know what an energy curtain is, it's essentially installed right around the gutter height of a house, or a little bit taller. And what that does is, you the sun is the ultimate power source out there for both heat, light. Nothing can mimic exactly what it puts out here on Earth. And so, at night, heat loss is high, extremely high. And the idea is to prevent it from actually escaping, because heat rises compared to cold air temperatures. So your ground is going to be the coldest, peak of the greenhouse is going to be the hottest. And so what we want to do is prevent that heat from pushing down, or staying down at where the crop level is, so that your heaters is not trying to heat in the whole airspace that's not needed, because we don't need to heat up high. The only thing that's used for heat up high is melting snow. We added an energy curtain to your facility, and what that really does is it cuts down about 30 to 40% of the heat loss that's within a greenhouse when it's heating. And so we tell growers that you should pull that at night, so that the heaters will run underneath and hold the heat underneath. Now, you will get some heat loss through air leakage, closures not fully closed, or gaps or anything like that, and that's to be expected. But 30 to 40% is huge, as far as greenhouses are concerned. And there's a lot of growers out there that actually don't have any curtains at all, no shade systems, and so they're heating a lot of space. So this is something that I would say, as a retrofit for older style greenhouses, would be something to look into. There's different styles, but one thing to consider is, you also have a flip point, is you are trapping a bunch of cold air in the peak of the greenhouse when that shade curtain, that energy curtain, is deployed. And so you just can't pull it open at 8 a.m. when the sun is on the horizon, warming up the top. It doesn't work that way. And so one of the things that you actually have to do is, you have to get rid of that cold air easily. And as crazy as it sounds, you vent it out. And how you do that is you slowly start to open that shade curtain as you turn your heating system on. And so heat rises, and as that curtain opens and your vent opens, the heat lifts that cold air out and through the roof of the house. You're thinking you're losing a lot of heat. You're losing a little bit, but in the long run, you're saving it, because your crop's not going to get what they call a cold crash. The last thing you would want is, if you have a poinsettia crop this time of year where it's 20 degrees outside, and you open those curtains, and that that air temperature that could be 30, 35 up in the peak, hitting your crop that takes 60, 65, 70 degrees, you're going to set that crop back. And so this is the most effective method. Now, there's two ways of doing it, and we've talked about this before. Manually, being there, crack of dawn, like getting ready to pull it, or you can have computer systems. Computer systems can measure the par value of the incoming light. So there might be a day where it's raining. Do you really need to pull it open that much? Probably not. You could save yourself that heat. But if it's, like here it is here in Ohio today, it's full bright sun, you want to use that sun energy. And so that computer system can look at the par value, and once it hits a certain par, it can start actively deploying that thing as it kicks on the heater and overriding the heating system, which makes you more energy efficient. So,
Well, on that note, that's great to end the conversation. My friend, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grower and the Economist. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate it wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us get discovered by new listeners. If you have questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a podcast topic, please email me at michelle@stratagerm.com. I love hearing from you. Until next time.